My boyfriend told me I was getting too bulky and that dating me emasculated him in a voicemail that played out loud during Pilates class. When I confronted him about the humiliation, he rolled his eyes and said, "You really made this public over one stupid message?" I didn't say a word. That was 3 months ago. This morning, he was screaming in a courtroom while 2 officers dragged him away in cuffs. I was halfway through my Saturday Pilates class in Manhattan, the one where we all show up in matching sets and pretend we're not dying, when my phone buzzed next to my Stanley. A voice message from my boyfriend. I loved his voice and my class is pretty chill, so I just hit play on full volume without thinking. "I don't like how much you've been working out lately. It's getting obsessive." My stomach dropped, but it got worse. "You're getting too bulky. Your shoulders are literally wider than mine. It emasculates me when we go out." Then the final blow. I didn't sign up to date a man in a room full of hourglass baddies. I felt like the ugliest piece of shot ever, but I didn't even have time to cry because when I looked up, the entire room was completely silent. 20 women, all frozen mid-plank, just staring at me. I wanted to dig myself into a hole and die. Then the instructor, Sophia, turned off the music. "Ladies, did we all just hear what I think we heard?" I still couldn't look up. My hands were literally shaking on the reformer handles. "Honey, look at me. That was Miranda. She's one of those perfect Upper East Side women who somehow looked perfect even while sweating, but her face wasn't disgusted. She was pissed." "Play that again," Sophia said. "What?" "No, it's play it again." I did. This time the reactions were immediate. Someone said, "Oh, hell no." Another woman actually laughed, but like an angry, disbelieving laugh. Sophia walked over to me. "How long have you been coming here?" 6 months, I whispered. "And in those 6 months you've gotten stronger, more confident, and absolutely stunning. You know what? You haven't gotten bulky. You're snatched." Miranda pulled out her phone. "What's his Instagram? Why?" "Just trust me," I told her. Within like 10 seconds, she was scrolling through it. "Okay, this guy is an effing joke. Look at this, ladies." She held up her phone. "He follows nothing but fitness models. Every single one, like absolute muscle mommies. So he likes strong women, just not when it's his girlfriend." This from a woman in the back I'd never even talked to. "Classic," someone else said. Sophia clapped her hands. "Okay, new plan for today's class. We're going to make sure our girl here gets the fattest pump of her life." She looked at me, "And don't even think about trying to pay for this class or next week's or the week after that." The entire energy shifted like completely. Suddenly I was in the center reformer and Sophia was basically giving me a personal training session while everyone else followed along. "Lower on that lunge. Yes, girl. 8 down." Miranda was filming everything. So was the woman behind me and the one across from me. Like everyone had their phones out. "Are you guys gonna join in or girl?" "Shut the cachuot up. Just focus on your form," Miranda said with this little wink. Every time I did something good, someone would cheer. When my legs started shaking during the plank series, 3 women started counting down with me. "You got this. 5 more. 4 exclamation mark. This older woman, probably like 60-some, but absolutely killing it on her reformer, goes, "My ex-husband said the same thing to me 30 years ago. I stopped working out. Biggest regret of my life. Don't you dare dim your light for that insecure little boy." The teenager in the corner, probably some NYU student, added, "My boyfriend literally brags about how strong I'm getting." That's what real men do. By the end of class, I was dead, but felt incredible. My legs were shaking more than they ever had with Preston. Sophia had basically given me a personal training session worth like 300, and everyone had stayed an extra 15 minutes just to make sure I finished strong. As we were cooling down, the girlies were all hyping me up while snapping live photos of me, and I felt really good about myself. So when they put it on their Instagram stories and tagged me, I reposted them all with the song Flowers by Miley Cyrus with the part that says, "I can buy myself flowers." With the lyrics on, obviously, LOL, my phone started blowing up almost immediately. Like, the notifications wouldn't stop. His sister swiped up joking about how I was out of Preston's league. His girl best friend told me my body was tea. I don't know if it was the endorphins or the fact that 20 women just spent an hour hyping me up, but I felt loved, so I did something I never would have done before. I sent his mom the voice message. "Mrs. Davidson, I think you should hear what your son said about me." I spent the next 5 minutes detailing everything her son said and how it made me feel. She opened it immediately. Those 3 dots appeared and disappeared like 5 times. She ended up spamming me with voice recordings. "Are you kidding me right now?" Her Long Island accent was thick when she was mad. "I did not raise him like this. I'm literally shaking. This is disgusting behavior." Second message. "Honey, you need to leave him. I'm not even saying this as his mother. I'm saying this as a woman. This is not okay." Third message. "I'm calling him right now." Actually, no. I'm driving to his apartment. This ends today. It was around 4:00 p.m. by this point, and I was tired AF, so I took a fat nap. And when I woke up, I noticed my phone had been bombarded with dozens of texts and missed calls, all from Preston. The first voicemail was angry. The second was threatening. By the 10th, he was practically begging to talk about this rationally. "Just kidding. There's no channel. This all happened like 2 hours ago, and I'm still shaking." Around 6 p.m., I was sitting on my couch scrolling through literally hundreds of DMs from women sharing their own stories when I heard Preston's key in the lock. My whole body tensed up. He pushed the door open and stood there looking like absolute garbage, his button-down, wrinkled, eyes all red and puffy, still wearing the same clothes from yesterday when he'd left for his friend Derek's place. He didn't say sorry or ask if I was okay or anything normal. His first words were asking why I had to make this public. And the way he said it, like I was the one who did something wrong, made my stomach turn into knots. He started pacing around my living room, running his hands through his hair over and over, telling me his phone hadn't stopped going off since noon, that his boss had seen the Instagram stories because his coworker's wife follows me, that everyone at his office was laughing at him behind his back, that his mom wasn't answering any of his calls. He said I'd ruined his life over one stupid voicemail, and I literally couldn't believe he still didn't understand what he'd actually done. I stayed calm and told him I didn't ruin anything. I just shared his exact words in his own voice, that he ruined things himself by saying them. He lunged toward the coffee table trying to grab my phone, saying we needed to fix this together. But I snatched it away and told him there was no we anymore, not after what he said. His whole face changed from desperate to angry when he realized I was actually serious about breaking up. He asked if I was really going to throw away 2 years over this. Said he was just being honest about my body changing and hearing him double down instead of apologizing. Made me know I was making the right choice. My phone buzzed with a text from Miranda asking if I was safe because she'd seen his location at my building on Find My Friends, saying all the women from class were on standby if I needed them. That message reminded me I wasn't alone in this, and I told Preston he needed to leave my apartment and put his key on the counter before he left. He dropped onto my couch instead, crossing his arms and saying we needed to talk through this like adults. And when I said I'd call building security, he laughed this bitter laugh and said I'd already destroyed his reputation. So, what was a little more drama? His manipulation was so obvious now that I couldn't believe I'd dated him for 2 years without seeing it. I went to my bedroom and locked the door, immediately texting Sophia and Miranda that Preston wouldn't leave my apartment. Within maybe 2 minutes, they'd created a group chat with 12 women from class. Every single one offering to come over right away, and Olivia sent me a recording she'd made of Preston screaming at someone on the phone outside the Pilates studio earlier, saying I was a crazy Jew who was trying to ruin his life. Through my bedroom door, I could hear him on the phone with Derek loudly complaining about how I was being dramatic and ruining his life over nothing. And then his voice got quieter, but I still heard him say something that made my blood run cold about how I was going to regret this when I realized what he knew about me. I sat on my bed trying to figure out what Preston could possibly know that he'd use against me, thinking about all the things I'd told him over 2 years I'd shared when I trusted him completely. The thought of him using any of those private conversations as weapons made me feel physically sick to my stomach. My doorbell started ringing over and over, and I heard Preston get up and answer it, and then I heard his mom's voice, absolutely furious, yelling at him in her thick Long Island accent about driving all the way from Manhasset to find out her son was a misogynistic piece of garbage, telling him to get in her car right now. Preston started yelling back at his mom that I was being dramatic and making everything about me while she grabbed his arm and physically dragged him toward my door. He kept insisting she was taking my side because she always liked me better than him. And that's when Mrs. Davidson stopped dead in her tracks and turned to face him. Talk about group fitness taking on a whole new meaning. 20 women just turned a Pilates class into the most supportive intervention I've ever seen, complete with free sessions and instant social media justice. She told him maybe that was because I never gave her a reason not to like me. While he seemed determined to prove he was exactly the disappointment she was seeing right now, the look on his face went from angry to shocked, and he tried to pull away from her grip, but she held on tight and kept pulling him toward the door. I could hear them arguing all the way down the hallway, their voices echoing off the walls, until finally everything went quiet. About 15 minutes later, I heard my front door open and close really softly, and I peeked out of my bedroom to see my apartment empty, except for Preston's key sitting on my kitchen counter. Next to it was a handwritten note on a piece of paper torn from my grocery list pad that said she was sorry and I deserved so much better, and she'd make sure he didn't bother me again. Signed, Helen. My hands were shaking as I picked up the key and the note, and for the first time since this whole mess started, I felt like I could actually breathe again. I ordered Thai food from my favorite place down the street and set up my laptop on the coffee table to FaceTime with Miranda and Sophia while I ate pad Thai straight from the container. They were both home and immediately started doing these dramatic readings of all the supportive DMs I'd been getting, including one from some professional bodybuilder who offered to be my gym boyfriend to make Preston jealous. Miranda was using this deep voice, pretending to be the bodybuilder guy, and Sophia was dying laughing. And for a few minutes, everything felt normal again, like this was just another Saturday night gossiping with my girls instead of the worst day of my life. We stayed on for like 2 hours, and they made me promise to text them if I needed anything, even if it was 3:00 in the morning. When I finally went to bed, I actually managed to fall asleep pretty fast, probably because I was emotionally exhausted from everything. But when I woke up Sunday morning and grabbed my phone to check the time, I saw 47 missed calls from Preston and a wall of texts that started at 2 a.m. The first ones were apologizing and saying he didn't mean what he said. Then they got angry about me turning his mom against him, then pathetic, begging me to just talk to him, and the last one, sent at 4 a.m., made my blood run cold. He wrote that he knew about my eating disorder in college and asked how my Pilates friends would feel about that, and I literally felt sick to my stomach because I'd told him that in confidence over a year ago when we were having a deep conversation about our pasts. I immediately started taking screenshots of everything, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold the phone steady, and sent them all to the group chat with Miranda and Sophia. Miranda responded within seconds saying this was blackmail, and her ex tried the same thing, and I needed to save everything for evidence. Sophia added that she'd struggled with an ED too, and anyone who would weaponize that was absolute trash, and she'd personally tell the whole class if he tried anything. Their messages made me cry with relief because I'd been so scared they'd judge me or think differently of me, but instead, they were just protective and angry on my behalf. Around 2 that afternoon, Preston's sister Jasmine called me, and she sounded really upset as she told me Preston had shown up at her apartment at 5 a.m. completely drunk and ranting about how I'd turned everyone against him. She said she'd been recording his voicemails to her because she was worried about my safety and wanted documentation if I needed it for anything legal. I thanked her, and we talked for a few minutes about how she'd never seen him act like this before, and she was honestly scared of what he might do next. After we hung up, I spent the rest of the afternoon deep cleaning my apartment, stripping the bed and washing all the sheets, throwing away his toothbrush and the body wash he kept in my shower, and packing up everything else that reminded me of him. I found one of his hoodies in my closet, and instead of feeling sad, I just felt relieved that I wouldn't have to see it anymore. Miranda texted me about doing some cleansing ritual where we'd burn all his stuff, but I just put everything in a bag for donation because I didn't want to deal with setting anything on fire in my apartment. Monday morning, I got to work early trying to get back to normal, but when I walked into my office, there was this huge bouquet of roses on my desk with a card that said he was sorry for everything and to please give him another chance signed with just a P. My coworkers were all gathered around cooing over how romantic it was, but I felt like I was going to throw up. I picked up the whole arrangement, walked straight to the break room trash can, and dumped the entire thing, vase and all, making sure everyone saw me do it. About an hour later, my boss called me into her office looking concerned, and she told me Preston had called the company's main line trying to reach me since I'd blocked his number. She asked if this was going to affect my work or if we needed to involve security, and I assured her it wouldn't, but appreciated her having security keep an eye out just in case. During my lunch break, I was eating my salad at my desk when my phone buzzed with a text from Derek, Preston's best friend from college, asking to meet for coffee to clear the air and help fix things between us. I politely declined, but he kept pushing, saying Preston was really struggling and not himself, and I needed to understand his side of things. I blocked Derek's number 2 because I didn't need anyone trying to guilt me into taking Preston back or making excuses for his behavior. The rest of my workday dragged on, and by 6 I was packing up my stuff to head home. The subway platform was packed with the usual Monday evening crowd, but something felt off. I kept catching glimpses of baseball caps in my peripheral vision, and my heart would race every single time. A guy in a Yankees cap stood too close behind me on the escalator, and I practically ran up the steps. Another man wearing a Mets cap sat across from me on the train, and I switched cars at the next stop, even though it made me late. By the time I got to my building, I was exhausted from checking over my shoulder every 5 seconds. The doorman waved at me like usual, and I took the elevator up to my floor. When the doors opened, I froze. Preston was sitting on the floor outside my apartment with a pizza box and a bottle of wine next to him. He looked up with this weird smile and said, "We should have our regular Monday dinner." Like nothing had happened, I immediately backed into the elevator and pressed the lobby button over and over until the doors closed. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely dial the building's security number. The security desk told me to wait in the lobby while they sent someone up to deal with him. I texted my landlord about changing the locks and getting Preston banned from the building while I waited. She texted back immediately that Mrs. Davidson had already called her that afternoon, and the paperwork to officially trespass him would be done by tomorrow morning. About 30 minutes later, the security guard called to tell me Preston had been removed from my floor. The guard, an older guy named Carl, who'd worked there forever, said Preston had been really agitated and kept yelling about his rights and how they couldn't keep him from his girlfriend. Carl offered to do extra rounds past my floor that night, which made me feel a little safer. I finally went back up to my apartment and triple-checked all the locks before collapsing on my couch. The next morning, my alarm went off at 6, and I grabbed my phone to check the time. My Instagram was blowing up with notifications, which was weird since I hadn't posted anything. When I opened the app, my stomach dropped. All my recent posts were gone. Every single workout video, every progress pic, everything from the past 2 years had been deleted. Instead, there were old photos from college when I was super skinny and clearly not healthy. The bio had been changed to say, "Natural skinny is better than bulky muscles." My hands were literally shaking as I realized Preston must have remembered my password from when we were dating. I immediately started trying to recover my account while texting the group chat about what happened. Miranda was awake and started screenshotting everything before it could get taken down. Sophia texted that this was criminal harassment and I needed to document everything. Olivia said she could help trace the IP address since she was studying computer science at NYU. While I was dealing with all this, Mrs. Davidson called me. She was absolutely mortified about the Instagram hack and said Preston hadn't come home last night. She'd found his laptop open on the kitchen counter with my Instagram page still up on the screen. She'd already taken photos of everything and was heading to the police station to file a report as a witness. I thanked her and tried to get ready for work, but I couldn't focus on anything. At the office, I sat at my desk staring at my computer screen, but none of the presentations made any sense. My colleague Sarah brought me coffee without me even asking, and that small gesture made me tear up. I realized how messed up it was that Preston had made me so paranoid about people just being nice to me. At lunch, I met with a lawyer Miranda had recommended who specialized in harassment cases. She looked through all my screenshots and documentation and said I definitely had grounds for a restraining order, especially with the Instagram hack and the threatening voicemails. The retainer fee was more than I wanted to spend, but I handed over my credit card anyway, because my safety was worth it. I got back to the office around 3 a.m. and was trying to catch up on emails when reception called my desk phone. They said 2 men were in the lobby asking to see me, and one of them was getting aggressive. Preston's playing every page from the Toxic Ex handbook like he's studying for finals. Threats, guilt trips, hacking, and now sending his backup squad to the office. This guy's collecting red flags like they're Pokemon cards. My stomach sank when they described Preston in a suit with Derek next to him. I told reception to call security while I grabbed my stuff and headed for the back stairwell. I could hear Preston's voice getting louder as I slipped out the back entrance. My boss saw me practically running out, and I quickly explained what was happening. She immediately said I could work from home for the rest of the week and to stay safe. My hands were shaking as I ordered an Uber and kept checking behind me while waiting outside the building. The driver took forever, and I kept thinking Preston might come back any second. When I finally got in the car, my phone started buzzing with texts from Jasmine. She was sending voice messages saying Preston had been calling everyone in their family all day trying to get them to pressure me. Their aunt apparently told him off and hung up on him. Their cousin blocked him after he sent this long rant about how women stick together to destroy men. Jasmine said she'd never seen him act this crazy before, and she was worried about what he might do next. I texted Miranda asking if I could crash at her place because I didn't feel safe going home. She immediately said yes, and sent her doorman my photo so I could get in. Her apartment on the Upper East Side was like something out of a movie with floor-to-ceiling windows and marble everything. She had already ordered Chinese food and pulled out this expensive ice cream from her freezer. We put on Love Island, but I couldn't focus on anything. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped thinking it was Preston finding another way to contact me. Miranda noticed and flipped my phone face down on the coffee table. She told me to just breathe and that I was safe here, but I couldn't shake this feeling that he was going to show up somehow. The next morning at 7 a.m., my lawyer called saying she'd filed for an emergency restraining order based on all the harassment. The hearing was set for Friday morning, and Preston would be served papers today. She warned me he'd probably react badly when he got them, and suggested I stay somewhere else for a few nights. I was still at Miranda's when Sophia called me that afternoon, completely panicked. Preston had shown up at the studio during the lunch class, demanding to know if I was there. He was telling everyone I was mentally unstable and off my medication, which was completely made up. Several women filmed him getting dragged out by building security while he kept screaming about me being crazy. The studio was pressing charges for trespassing, and Sophia said he looked totally unhinged. About 2 hours later, the studio manager called to tell me they'd put Preston's photo at the front desk. If he came back, they'd call the police immediately. She said 12 different women from various classes had already come forward saying they'd testify about witnessing his harassment if I needed them to. That evening, I finally called my mom in Ohio to tell her everything that had been happening. She listened quietly while I explained about the voice message and everything that happened after. Then she said she never liked him because he'd always interrupt me when I was talking. She offered to fly out, but I told her I was okay, even though I wasn't really. Just hearing her voice and knowing she believed me without question was enough to keep me from completely falling apart. The next morning, my lawyer called to say Preston had been served the restraining order papers at his office. Within an hour, his mother was calling me crying and apologizing over and over. She kept saying she'd failed as a mother and this was all her fault somehow. I told her it wasn't her fault, but she insisted on covering all my legal fees as the least she could do. That afternoon, Derek texted me from a new number with screenshots from Preston's group chat with their friends. Preston was telling everyone I'd been cheating on him and doing drugs and that I'd set him up. The messages were getting more and more delusional with each screenshot Derek sent. He said he was sharing these because the guys needed to know the truth, and he was disturbed by how Preston was spiraling. I forwarded everything to my lawyer, who said it was perfect evidence of defamation if I wanted to pursue it. She mentioned we could expand this to a civil suit, but I just wanted Preston to leave me alone. The idea of any connection to him, even through court stuff, made me feel exhausted and sick. That evening, I went back to my apartment for the first time in 2 days to grab more clothes. Everything looked normal, but it didn't feel like home anymore. The space felt wrong, like Preston's presence had contaminated it somehow. I packed quickly while checking over my shoulder constantly and jumping at every little noise from the hallway. I grabbed what I needed and got out of there fast, spending another night at the hotel, even though my bank account was crying about it. The next day passed in a blur of work meetings where I could barely focus and constant checking over my shoulder whenever I left the office. That evening around 7:30, I was finally leaving my building after grabbing more stuff when I saw it. Preston's car parked right across the street with him, just sitting there watching me through the windshield. My whole body went cold and my hands started shaking as I pulled out my phone to take photos and videos of him sitting there staring at me. The restraining order hadn't been approved yet, so technically he wasn't breaking any law, but I called 911 anyway and told them I felt unsafe with my ex watching my building. I stayed in the lobby with the doorman who kept asking if I was okay while we waited for the cops to show up. 2 officers arrived about 30 minutes later and walked over to Preston's car while I watched from inside. I could see him gesturing and talking with his hands moving all over the place, probably giving them some story. One officer came back inside and told me Preston claimed he was just parked on a public street and happened to be in the neighborhood visiting a friend. They couldn't arrest him, but they'd told him to leave and were documenting everything for my restraining order case. I stayed in the lobby for another hour until the doorman confirmed Preston's car was gone, and even then I was too scared to go back to my apartment. The next morning, I had to be at court by 9 muon for the restraining order hearing, and my stomach was in knots the whole subway ride there. Walking into that courtroom and seeing Preston already there in his best navy suit with an actual lawyer next to him made me want to throw up. He was sitting there looking all professional and calm, like he was the victim in this whole thing. The judge started reviewing all the evidence while Preston sat there with this fake concerned expression on his face. His lawyer stood up and started talking about how the voice message was taken out of context and how I'd orchestrated a social media hate campaign against his client. My lawyer stayed calm and just laid out the timeline showing every text Preston sent after I blocked him and how he hacked my Instagram and posted those photos. The judge looked at Preston and asked him directly why he accessed my Instagram account without permission. Preston's lawyer tried to answer, but the judge cut him off and said he wanted to hear from Preston himself. That's when everything changed because Preston couldn't keep his cool anymore and started ranting about how I made him do these things by humiliating him. He actually said I was probably sleeping with someone from that Pilates class, and that's why I was trying to get this restraining order. The judge told him to stop talking and granted the restraining order for 1 full year effective immediately. Preston stormed out with his lawyer, basically running after him, trying to calm him down. I sat in a coffee shop afterward, feeling weirdly empty instead of happy about winning. The barista noticed my shaking hands and brought me a free cookie with a little heart drawn on the napkin, which made me tear up. These random acts of kindness from strangers kept hitting me harder than they should. I texted the group chat about the restraining order, and my phone basically exploded with celebration messages and hearts and champagne emojis. Sophia said tomorrow's Saturday class would be a celebration of strength in my honor, and Miranda said she was bringing actual champagne for after. For the first time all week, I felt like maybe things would be okay. That evening, Mrs. Davidson texted me that Preston got fired from his job because apparently his company has a zero-tolerance policy for employees with restraining orders. She said the scene he made when they served him at work didn't help, and now he was moving back to her house on Long Island, and she was getting him into therapy whether he wanted it or not. Saturday morning, I walked back into the Pilates studio for the first time since everything started, and everyone literally started clapping, which was super embarrassing but also made me feel so supported. Sophia had adjusted the whole workout to be empowering but not too intense, and everyone kept checking on me throughout the class. After class, I finally went back to my apartment to actually stay there, and the silence felt different than before. Every little sound made me jump and wonder if Preston had found some way around the restraining order, even though I knew that was impossible. I double-checked all the locks and closed every single blind and curtain, which I'd never done before in the 3 years I'd lived there. The next morning, my phone woke me up at like 11 with Jasmine calling, and she sounded really upset, so I picked up right away. She told me Preston had been posting all over Reddit making himself look like the victim and saying I was part of some toxic gym cult that turned me against him. She'd been trying to report his posts and comment with what really happened, but he kept making new accounts every time one got banned. I pulled up Reddit on my laptop while she was still talking and found one of his posts in a relationship advice sub with like 300 comments already. Preston's Reddit crusade really puts the ex in extremely online. Nothing says I'm totally stable, like creating multiple accounts to fight strangers about your restraining order while living back with mom. He wrote this whole thing about how his girlfriend got brainwashed by her Pilates class and turned violent when he tried to express concern about her obsessive workout habits. The comments were split between people calling him out for being controlling and others actually believing his version. Jasmine said she'd screenshot everything for evidence, but it was making her sick seeing him twist everything around. I spent the rest of Sunday going through his posts and taking screenshots of my own, while also packing a bag in case I needed to leave my apartment quickly. Monday morning came way too fast and I had to go to work even though I barely slept. I got to the parking garage at 8 and walked toward my car, but stopped dead when I saw all 4 tires were completely flat. Not just flat, but actually slashed with huge cuts in the rubber. My hands started shaking as I called building security, and they came down within minutes to look at the damage. The security guard called my boss while I stood there trying not to cry, and she came down to the garage herself, looking absolutely furious. She told me to go wait in her office while they pulled the security footage and called the police. 2 cops showed up within an hour and went through the footage with security while I sat upstairs trying to focus on work, but mostly just staring at my computer screen. My lawyer called when I texted him about the tires and said if we could prove it was Preston, this would violate the restraining order and he'd go to jail. Around 2 more in the afternoon, the detective came up to tell me they had clear footage of someone in a hoodie and baseball cap slashing my tires, but the person's face wasn't visible. The build looked wrong for Preston, though, because this guy was taller and broader in the shoulders. I immediately thought of Derek and told the detective about him being Preston's best friend from college. Within an hour, they had Derek at his apartment, and he cracked immediately when they showed him the footage. He admitted Preston paid him $500 to mess with my car and send me a message, but swore he didn't know about the restraining order. The cops arrested Derek on the spot and put out a warrant for Preston for conspiracy to violate the protective order. I was still at work trying to process everything when Mrs. Davidson called me at 6, completely hysterical. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her, but she managed to tell me Preston never came home after Derek got arrested. She found a note in his room saying he was going to fix things once and for all, and she was terrified of what that meant. She'd already called the police and they were at her house, but nobody knew where Preston went. I left work immediately and drove straight to Miranda's apartment because I didn't want to be alone, and she lived in a doorman building with good security. She let me stay in her guest room and made me tea while I called my lawyer to update him on everything. The police put out an alert for Preston that night, and my lawyer told me I should stay somewhere unpredictable for the next few days just to be safe. Sophia texted offering her guest room, which seemed random enough that Preston wouldn't think to look there. So I accepted. I went back to my place with Miranda to pack more clothes and realized how insane this all was, because just a week ago, my biggest worry was whether my shoulders looked too big in tank tops. Tuesday morning, I woke up in Sophia's guest room to her cat jumping on the bed and the smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen. She was making eggs and had the news on, and everything felt so normal except for the fact that I was hiding from my ex-boyfriend who'd basically lost his mind. I hadn't eaten a real meal in days because my stomach was constantly in knots, but Sophia made me sit down and eat breakfast anyway. Around 3 that afternoon, my phone exploded with texts from everyone I knew because Preston had been arrested at Newark Airport. He tried to board a flight to Miami using a ticket he bought with Derek's credit card information, but the airline flagged it as fraud. The cops grabbed him at the gate and charged him with criminal contempt, conspiracy to violate a protective order, and identity theft. His bail got set at $50,000, and his mom refused to pay it, saying he needed to face the consequences of his actions. Wednesday morning, my lawyer called with updates about Preston's case and said his lawyer was already pushing for a plea deal. They wanted to claim temporary emotional distress and get him mandatory therapy instead of jail time. The prosecutor wanted to know what I thought, but I honestly didn't know, because part of me wanted him punished, but mostly I just wanted this whole nightmare to be over. That evening, I tried going to a yoga class at a different studio to get back to my normal routine, but I spent the whole time looking at every person who walked by the door. Every guy made my heart race, and I kept checking the exits and watching the windows. The instructor noticed I was freaking out and quietly asked if I was okay and offered to walk me to my car after class, which was really nice, but also made me realize how messed up I'd become. Thursday morning, Derek's lawyer reached out to mine saying Derek wanted to testify against Preston in exchange for a lighter sentence. He had text messages showing Preston getting more and more aggressive when Derek first said no to helping him. The messages were honestly scary because Preston was threatening to ruin Derek's life if he didn't help and calling him every name in the book. Friday morning came fast, and my lawyer called to say Preston's bail hearing was at 10 and I didn't have to be there, which was a relief. She texted me updates as it happened, and apparently Preston completely lost it in court. He fired his lawyer right there in front of everyone and started yelling about being persecuted and demanded to cross-examine me even though I wasn't there. The judge shut him down hard and denied his bail modification request and sent him back to jail until trial. That afternoon, Mrs. Davidson texted asking if we could meet for coffee, and when I saw her, she looked like she'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks. Her hands were shaking as she pushed a box across the table with some of my stuff from Preston's apartment. She told me Preston had been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. And looking back, there were so many signs she'd ignored or made excuses for. She kept apologizing over and over, and I could tell she was really broken up about everything her son had become. Saturday morning, I went back to Pilates for the first time in days, and Sophia had everyone doing planks when I walked in. I jumped in, and something just clicked because I held that plank for 3 minutes straight, which was my personal best ever. Sophia announced it to the whole class, and everyone started cheering, and Miranda filmed it. And for those 3 minutes, I didn't think about Preston or court or anything. I actually posted the video myself this time, with just a simple caption about getting stronger every day. Sunday, I started looking for a new apartment because I couldn't feel safe in my current place anymore. The realtor kept showing me buildings with doormen and security systems. And when I said I just needed a fresh start, she gave me this knowing look. She told me half her clients were women in similar situations, which was both sad and weirdly comforting. Monday morning, everything went to hell again when HR called me in saying they'd received an anonymous email with fake intimate photos of me. The IT department traced it to a computer at the public library near the jail, and the prosecutor added more charges against Preston for cybercrimes and harassment. My boss called me into her office that afternoon, but instead of being mad, she offered me paid leave if I needed it and said the company would pay for counseling. She told me she'd gone through something similar 15 years ago and wished she'd had this kind of support back then. I started crying right there in her office, and she just handed me tissues and told me to take all the time I needed. Tuesday evening, I had my first therapy appointment, and when the therapist asked when I last felt truly safe, I couldn't even answer at first. Then I realized it was before I met Preston. Because even during our good times, I was always watching what I said and did to avoid setting him off. Thursday, the prosecutor called with a plea deal offer for Preston, which was 18 months in jail and 5 years probation, plus mandatory therapy and a permanent restraining order. She said if he didn't take it, they'd go for the maximum 5 years and asked if I was okay with the deal. I thought about it overnight and decided I wanted closure more than revenge. So, Friday morning, I told them to accept it. Preston's lawyer called back an hour later saying Preston would only take the deal if I admitted I overreacted, which made the prosecutor so mad she withdrew the offer completely. She said we were going to trial and she was going for the maximum sentence now because that showed he had zero remorse. Saturday at Pilates, a new woman came up to me after class with tears in her eyes. She said she'd seen my story shared in a women's support group online, and it gave her the courage to leave her abusive boyfriend last week. She thanked me for being brave enough to share what happened and said I probably saved her life. It didn't make what I went through worth it, but at least something good came from all this pain. Tuesday morning, my lawyer called with news about the trial date being set for 3 months out. Preston's new lawyer was already filing motions trying to get the Instagram posts and voice message thrown out as evidence. He kept saying the posts were free speech and the voice message was private. The judge wasn't having any of it and denied every single motion. Preston's legal strategy of demanding his victim admit she overreacted really shows he graduated from the school of missing the point with highest honors. Way to tank your own plea deal, genius. 2 days later, I went to sign a lease on a new apartment across town. The building had a doorman and security cameras everywhere, plus you needed a key fob just to get in the elevator. The landlord was this older woman who took one look at my restraining order paperwork and said she'd had other tenants in my situation. She made sure I knew about the panic buttons in every room and the direct line to security. That Sunday, the Pilates crew came over to help me pack up my old place. Miranda brought champagne, and Sophia brought moving boxes, while Olivia made a playlist of breakup songs. We went through 2 years' worth of stuff, and every time we found something of Preston's, it went straight in the trash. When we found our old photos together, I didn't even feel sad anymore, just relief that it was over. Olivia wanted to burn them in some kind of ritual, but we just used the shredder instead. Friday evening, I had to go back to court because Derrick was getting sentenced for helping Preston break the restraining order. The judge gave him 200 hours of community service and probation. Outside the courthouse, Derrick stopped me and started crying, saying Preston had convinced him I was the crazy one. He'd been going to therapy and realized how messed up their whole friend group was. The next Wednesday morning, Preston's lawyer tried something really dirty by subpoenaing my medical records from 5 years ago. He found out I'd been treated for an eating disorder in college and wanted to use it to prove I was mentally unstable. My lawyer immediately filed to block it, saying it had nothing to do with the case. The judge agreed and actually fined Preston's lawyer for even trying that move. Monday afternoon was when things got really interesting because Mrs. Davidson had to give a deposition about her son. She brought emails and texts from 2 of Preston's ex-girlfriends who'd reached out after seeing the news. Both of them had similar stories about him getting controlling and angry when they tried to leave. One girl had gotten a restraining order 3 years ago that Preston violated twice. Saturday evening, Miranda set me up on a coffee date with her friend from work. The guy was perfectly nice and normal, but I spent the whole time looking for red flags and everything he said. When he reached for the sugar, I actually flinched, thinking he was going to grab me. He asked if I wanted to get dinner sometime, and I made up an excuse about being too busy. I wasn't ready to trust anyone new yet. Thursday morning, Preston had to complete his court-ordered psychological evaluation for the trial. The psychologist diagnosed him with narcissistic personality disorder and antisocial features. Preston's lawyer tried to spin it as an insanity defense, but the psychologist testified that Preston absolutely knew right from wrong. He just didn't care about the harm he caused other people. Tuesday afternoon, the prosecutor called with huge news that 2 more of Preston's exes wanted to testify. One of them still had the restraining order from 3 years ago with documentation of every time he'd violated it. The prosecutor was adding more charges for stalking and harassment based on the pattern of behavior. Every Sunday morning, I kept going to Pilates, and my body was getting stronger than it had ever been. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the bulky shoulders Preston complained about. I saw muscles that had carried me through the worst time of my life. I posted a photo on Instagram, not to show off my body, but because my smile finally looked real again. The weeks passed in a blur of lawyer meetings and prep sessions until Friday finally came and my mom's flight landed at JFK. She hugged me so tight at arrivals that I could barely breathe. Back at my apartment, she kept touching everything like she was making sure it was real. We ordered Thai food and sat on my couch while she looked around at my new place with all its safety features. Her eyes got wet when she saw the security system panel by the door. She kept saying I looked different, stronger, but also harder somehow. That night, she slept in my guest room, and I actually slept through the whole night without checking the locks even once. 5 days later, we were at the courthouse for jury selection, and there was Preston across the room looking like he'd lost 20 LABs. His suit hung loose on him, and those perfect cheekbones looked sharp enough to cut glass. He kept trying to catch my eye, but I stared at the table in front of me while my lawyer took notes. When he figured out I wasn't going to look at him, he started muttering stuff under his breath until his lawyer grabbed his arm. The next morning, the prosecutor laid out Preston's pattern of abuse with screenshots and recordings and timelines on a big screen. Preston's lawyer painted me as some crazy attention seeker who planned everything to ruin his life because he dumped me. A few jurors frowned when he said Preston was the real victim of cancel culture. Friday morning came too fast, and suddenly I was on the witness stand for 4 straight hours going through every single thing that happened. The prosecutor had me walk through each piece of evidence while Preston's lawyer kept interrupting to object. During cross-examination, his lawyer kept pushing about how I wanted revenge and was trying to get famous from this. I kept my voice steady and just stuck to the facts even when he got nasty about my social media posts. When I talked about being scared to leave my apartment, some jurors looked really worried. That afternoon, Sophia took the stand and brought the security footage from the studio showing Preston trying to get in when he was never a member. She had all the sign-in sheets proving he'd never been there before. That day he showed up screaming. Her voice got hard when she described how scared her other clients were. Monday morning, Miranda showed up with a whole binder of printed screenshots and walked the jury through every fake account Preston made. She showed them side-by-side comparisons, proving the deep fake photos were edited from my Instagram. When she put the edited photos on the screen, a woman on the jury actually gasped. That afternoon, they brought in someone I'd never seen before, this small blonde woman who looked terrified. She was Preston's ex from 3 years ago, and she told the same exact story as mine, but worse. She had to move from Boston to Miami just to get away from him after he kept showing up at her job. She cried when she described finding him in her apartment one night, just sitting on her couch in the dark. Tuesday morning, Preston demanded to testify, even though his lawyer kept shaking his head, no. He started out calm, but every time the prosecutor questioned something, he said his face got redder. He kept changing his story about why he was at the studio, and first said he was worried about me, then said I invited him, then said he had a right to be there. When the prosecutor showed him his own texts, he claimed they were taken out of context. Then she asked about the deep fakes, and he actually said they weren't that bad and maybe I should be flattered. His lawyer put his head in his hands. Tuesday afternoon, the prosecutor went hard, asking him about every single lie he'd told. Preston lost it completely and stood up yelling that I deserved everything for humiliating him. He said women like me needed to learn our place and that he was just trying to teach me a lesson. The judge banged her gavel and threatened to hold him in contempt while his lawyer tried to pull him back down. The jury looked shocked, and one older man was shaking his head. Wednesday morning, both lawyers gave their closing arguments with the prosecutor, showing a clear timeline of how Preston went from mean texts to stalking to making threats. She showed how everything escalated after I didn't take him back and how he couldn't handle losing control. Preston's lawyer tried to argue reasonable doubt, but even he seemed to know it was over from how quiet his voice got. The jury filed out to deliberate, and Preston finally looked at me with this expression I'd never seen before, like he finally understood he'd lost. 3 hours felt like 3 days, but then the bailiff called us back in and everyone rushed to their seats while the jury filed in looking serious and not making eye contact with anyone. The foreman stood up with the paper shaking slightly in his hands and started reading guilty on the first count of criminal contempt. And Preston's head snapped toward me with his mouth open like he couldn't believe it. Guilty on stalking, guilty on harassment, guilty on cybercrimes, guilty on conspiracy. Each verdict hit him harder, and by the last one his lawyer was holding his arm to keep him seated, while Preston kept shaking his head and mouthing no over and over. The judge thanked the jury and scheduled sentencing for the next morning at 10, and Preston had to be escorted out because he wouldn't stop staring at me with this look that went from shock to rage to something like actual understanding that he'd lost everything. The next morning, the courtroom was packed for sentencing, and the prosecutor called me first for my victim impact statement. So, I stood at the podium with my hands gripping the edges and talked about the nightmares and therapy sessions and how I still check my locks 5 times before bed. Preston's other ex went next and described years of looking over her shoulder and changing her number constantly and moving 3 times because she never felt safe. Mrs. Davidson spoke last about losing the son she thought she raised and how she blamed herself for not seeing the signs earlier, and her voice broke when she said Preston needed help, not just punishment. The judge took his time reviewing everything before announcing 4 years in state prison plus 10 years probation and a lifetime restraining order and mandatory psychological treatment. And Preston jumped up screaming about appeals and how this was all lies and conspiracy against him. Preston's courtroom meltdown really sealed the deal. Nothing says I'm totally innocent like screaming at a judge after getting caught red-handed with fake photos, death threats, and a bonus personality disorder diagnosis. 2 officers had to physically drag him out while he kept yelling my name and threats about what would happen when he got out. And even his lawyer looked relieved when the doors finally closed behind them. Outside the courthouse, Mrs. Davidson hugged me so tight I could barely breathe and promised she'd make sure Preston stayed away if he ever got out early and would keep getting him help, because that's what mothers do, even when their kids break their hearts. The prosecutor shook my hand and said I was one of the strongest witnesses she'd seen in 20 years of doing this work, but I didn't feel strong, just empty and tired and ready to move forward. Friday morning, I walked back into my office for the first time in weeks, and my coworkers didn't bombard me with questions, just welcomed me back with coffee and donuts. And my boss had put me on a new project developing a wellness app, which felt perfect. Monday morning at Pilates, Sophia gathered everyone before class to announce they were starting a support group for women dealing with harassment and abuse. And 12 women immediately signed up, including 2 I'd never expected to need something like that. Saturday afternoon, I was unpacking the last box in my new apartment when I found my old journal from when Preston and I first started dating. And reading those early entries about how perfect and romantic he was made me see how slowly the control started with little comments about my clothes, then my friends, then my body. I closed it and put it in a drawer, not as something to dwell on, but as proof of how far I'd come and how much I'd learned about what real love should look like. Thursday evening, the studio threw a celebration party they called Strength in Numbers, and woman after woman shared stories about controlling exes and workplace harassment and family members who tried to make them smaller. And I realized I wasn't special or broken, just part of a huge community of survivors. Tuesday morning, I woke up in my new place without immediately checking the locks or looking out the window for suspicious cars and made coffee while actually enjoying the quiet instead of being scared of it. My shoulders were broader and stronger as I stretched, and I could feel the muscle I'd built not just in my body, but in my spirit. And Preston's voice telling me I was too bulky seemed like something from another lifetime. That evening at class, Sophia announced we were doing endurance training and challenged me to hold a 5-minute plank, which seemed impossible, but the whole class started cheering and counting with me. My arms shook at 2 minutes and burned at 3 hours, and at 4 hours I wanted to quit. But Miranda yelled that Preston was in prison where he belonged, and I was here getting stronger, and that gave me the push to hold on. The last 30 seconds felt like 30 hours, but every woman in that room counted down with me, and when I finally collapsed at exactly 5 minutes, they erupted in cheers and applause, and group hugged me on the floor. Sophia helped me up and said I wasn't the same person who played that voice message months ago because that woman was scared and small, but this woman was unbreakable. And she was right because Preston tried to make me weaker, but instead, I became exactly what he feared most, which was strong enough to leave him and brave enough to fight back and powerful enough to win. All right, that's a wrap on my end. Rolling up the old commentary, Matt. Appreciate you letting me be the snarky voice in the back of your head. Catch you in the next one. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.